So as Leah mentioned, my name is Abby Hodder. I'm the Chief Operating Officer and the Director of International Business for EcoNext, which is an industry association focused on the acceleration of the green economy in Newfoundland and Labrador. Today, our panelists have come together to address the critical issues at the intersection of mineral development, environmental responsibility, and community engagement. We recognize the pressing need to establish resilient supply chains for critical minerals like copper, nickel, lithium, and others that are crucial for driving the green transition. By finding sustainable solutions, we not only minimize environmental impact, but also bolster public trust during this transformative period. Throughout our discussions, we'll explore how securing a social license to operate goes beyond project management, affecting investor confidence and community relationships. We'll also examine the power of diversity initiatives and partnerships with Indigenous communities in fostering stronger, more resilient operations. We will delve into the importance of transparent environmental assessments and robust community engagement in gaining stakeholder support, and we'll consider how adopting a circular economy perspective can reduce project footprints while opening up new avenues for financial success. Drawing inspiration from local stories, we'll uncover practical insights and lessons for sustainable mineral development. So let's get started with some introductions. I'll ask each of the panelists to briefly introduce who you are and what you do. We'll start with Shem and move our way over.
Hello. Hi, everybody. So my name is Shem Evans. I'm an environmental specialist and project manager with Hatch Engineering, and about 16 years working in the environmental industry, primarily in construction environmental management. So some of the legacy projects, Long Harbor nickel processing plant, Muskrat Falls, Lower Churchill project, and then other projects further afield throughout Canada, British Columbia and Ontario. And the last 3 years I've been with Hatch and in a consultancy role doing environmental assessments, compliance permitting, and advising companies, mining companies inclusive, of obligations and corporate compliance.
Hello, my name is Jenny Brake. I'm the acting chief for Hollywood First Nation and also the Western Vice Chief for Hollywood First Nation, so covering the western region of our territory, which takes in 6 wards of the 67 communities, kind of a broad geographical region to cover. I'm actually a welder by trade and an artist, and born and raised on the west coast of Newfoundland.
Kwe Nindaluizi Angelina. Hello, my name is Angelina Francis. I work with the Natural Resources Department down in Melbugig First Nations. I take on the community engagement down there. I'm also in the role for Valentine Gold Caliber for their community liaison as well. So I've been pretty excited to be here and learned a lot of stuff. So let's have some talks.
Great. Well, thank you all for being here. It's an honor. We're going to dive right in with social license to operate. The involvement of local communities and Indigenous governments is critical to the success of companies such as Vale, Caliber, and others in securing investment during the development stages of a project. How do you think general social license and Indigenous consent to operate plays into the success of a new project from the perspectives of project management as well as investor support? And Chief Rake, we'll start with you, and then the others can join in as well.
Sure. Social licensing is something that we take a high priority on, because without social licensing, a project really can't take place. This is, the simplest way to explain it. Through Hollywood First Nation, our council decides on social licensing, and I'm sure the same can be said for Miabogek. So the councillors represent the regions, and they make the decision on whether a project meets the criteria for social licensing. If you do not have the the meaningful consultation that should take place leading up to the social licensing, there's a gap there. There's a disjointment in whether something can happen or not. And I mean, if anyone listened to the keynote at lunchtime with Mr. Padden, you see what happens when that doesn't take place. So, there's a lot of things that we learn as we go. And I've been trying really hard to encourage companies to have meaningful relationships with us, because as one of 2 federally recognized Indian bands in the province, or on the island, Mi'kmaq bands, It's just so crucial that we have that meaningful engagement, and we have the talks that are needed around what's being done. So quite often, folks will send out, their industry people to come talk to communities. But, like it was referenced, when you have someone from the community that's going to have the conversations, that's a much better way to go about it. So from my perspective, social licensing is as important as the EA or anything else, investment terms, anything. It's one of the key parts of any contract coming to fruition.
Thank you. Anything to add from the other panelists?
No, I think it's a good point, and the early and meaningful engagement early on feeds into the environmental assessment. Mitigation measures may come from comments or concerns from affected communities and people. So engaging early and bringing that right through the environmental assessment, forming mitigation measures, they get into environmental protection plans, execution, and it just strengthens those relationships for sure. So
it can actually even be cost saving in the long run.
Yes.
So, some look at it as a nuisance, we'll say, but it's actually something that can be quite beneficial to having a really effective project.
Absolutely, and that dovetails nicely into the next question, which is with respect to community engagement. And considering the level of public trust and First Nation duty to consult obligations required to develop a project, how does community engagement impact transparent environmental assessments, which lead to greater public buy-in? What are some key takeaways for companies approaching this stage? Angelina, I'll ask you to start there.
So this could be a touchy subject. So engagement came a long way from where it was to. With the Truth and Reconciliation, it seems like more companies are starting to reach out to people and to the Indigenous communities, and along with UNDRIP as well. So with Caliber, we had like really good engagement with them as well. They keep us up to date. They include us on anything that they can, and it's a work in progress. But unfortunately, being in the engagement aspect as being an Indigenous community, sometimes it's very hard to have someone approach you. So a lot of the companies that are coming up, they don't approach us. We have to go and approach them. We have to get our foot in the door. Sometimes it can cause some rackets, but we get past it. We develop those relationships, and like we have companies coming into the community to present and inform our students of the mining life out there. So that's a great engagement for our schools as well. And it gets the Indigenous people out there. So with the engagement thing, you have to build those relationships. Like having a relationship with an Indigenous community will have benefits to your mining as well. And like being in Newfoundland, and it's really hard to get Mi'kmaq First Nations rights recognized. We're still working in the process of being recognized for our rights, which is ongoing, but it takes a lot to approach these big companies knowing that you don't have a lot, but for the goodness of these companies that are coming up for the engagement sides of it, it's great when they approach you. It shows that they care about your opinions. They care about how you would like to see things run, so I'm grateful for that. I just hope that the engagement reaches out farther to the other companies that are coming up here in Central now, because there's a few that was here at the MinEx that I was really unaware of. So, you may be hearing from me, but it's nice to have that engagement. So like a big takeaway for companies that are coming up, and start those processes. Get out there, get your engagement done, build your relationships with Indigenous communities. You'll be substantially surprised at how well Indigenous knowledge can actually benefit you for your process of your company.
That's great. Anything from the other panelists to add?
I'd love to jump in because, to speak to what you mentioned about having to go find them. I've been on calls, Zoom calls, with upwards to 50 companies, and some of them are putting up slide decks that have our logos on them. And we have full support of the Indigenous groups in the province, and I'm thinking, who is this? you know, and we get told all the time, oh, yes, no, when they came in and they pitched, they said that you folks, you know, support them, so that's great. And, you know, there's a gap between our provincial government and all the proponents where we're not holding anyone accountable for that support. So for instance, if you receive a grant or you receive, or a grant application, or you receive an application for industry development, and it says that it has the support from Miabagek First Nation or Hollywood First Nation, which are the only two recognized bands on the island, but you don't have a letter from that chief that says, yes, we support that project, then they do not have the support. So there's not many left in the audience, but if you can take that home, that'd be great.
A lot of people just consider us as a box check. That was mentioned earlier. We're so much more than a box check.
Passing your business card to us doesn't mean you've had meaningful consultation, so I can't stress that enough. Cup of tea, a lot of cup of tea.
There's a difference between checking a box and meaningfully engaging, and I think that's one of the key messages we want folks to take away here today. Just to kind of dive into the environmental side of things now a bit, Shem, when considering the environmental impact of a mining operation, how would you say mining has changed from previous generations? And what impact have regulatory requirements such as the financial assurance to return, that your company can return and cover the costs of reclamation and closure impacted project development in the minerals industry? That's a couple questions, sorry.
So I guess it's dependent on how deep time you want to go back and look at some of these things. Like obviously in the 70s and the 80s was sort of the inception of a lot of environmental institutions within Canada, provincially, and then statutes and legislation that protected the environment as well. You know, progressively being developed right up through, you know, the late 90s, early 2000s, Newfoundland Labrador Environmental Protection Act, environmental assessment regulations, the Modernized Fisheries Act, you know, in 2019, and the metals, diamond, and mining effluent regulations. You know, you can list quite a few. There's a very complex regulatory framework that has definitely promoted a different standard of care, essentially, for all projects, not just mining projects. But also, you know, now we know a lot more from the perspective of science on metal leaching, acid rock drainage, how to manage those types of things. And even from the earlier panel, panel 4, where Perry, Alex, Jamie, and Steve sort of talked about the mine closure planning, reclamation, and closure plans, or RCPs. You know, there is financial assurances and letters of credit or bond that companies are held to ensure that they are going to perform as intended and that they can clean up their mess. So they can basically, they have the capacity to stop before they start.
That's great. The next question is going to do with DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. I think we all know that when successfully implemented, DEI, companies that embrace DEI have a more successful bottom line. Their middle management, their boards of directors, when more diverse, pays dividends. What is the key to actually implementing successful DEI measures and not just, once again, checking boxes? And I'll invite anyone to jump in on that one. I'm
gonna just go for it, because I've worked in advocacy for women in trades and for Indigenous folks in trades, and I check 2 of those boxes. So from my experience looking at diversity and inclusion, I mean, it is key to a successful business, because you need everybody, you know, when you have that diversity, it holds everybody accountable to rise to the occasion and really work hard, and it sets a standard of different views and different outlooks. Like, there's so much benefit to diversity and inclusion. But when we look at how we measure diversity and inclusion, if we don't have measurables, you know, like I hear people throw around, oh, we have 8%, oh, we have 5%. But how do you know that? Like, what are your measurables? So, you know, I'm kind of leaning hard into government accountability, but if the province sets a percentage or an actual physical number, then how are you referencing that? Like, what is the accountability, and what are the, you know, the frameworks in place that ensure that diversity inclusion is taking place. Because we can say, oh, I'm, pretty sure that most of these folks self-ID, or, you can't assume. There can't be any assumption. There has to be some way to keep measurables in place to make sure that companies are meeting these targets. So in my role, offices like Office to Advance Women Apprentices, who have done a fantastic job. I mean, they're deemed a national best practice and duplicated in 5 other provinces for advocating for women in trades and putting women to work. When I worked there during COVID, there were more women going to work at our colleges than men because of the wraparound supports that existed. And I know that from firsthand experience, without wraparound supports, a lot of tradespeople can't succeed through the apprenticeship process because it is such a complex process. So Office to Advance Women Apprentices is the best example, in my opinion, of elevating marginalized groups or underrepresented groups and giving them a safe place and making sure, holding these industry people to task and saying, no, we're going to work with you. We're going to help you with your diversity inclusion. The Trades and Indigenous Office does the same kind of work. I worked with them. They actually modeled their office after Office to Advance Women Apprentices because they do such a fantastic job. And, these are the types of things we need to have in place. We need to make sure we're reviewing the apprenticeship processes, because if you're a single mom from Nain, you can't go and do a block of training out in St. John's and leave your family and quit your job for 6 weeks or leave your job. And, there's so many things that we need to do to support people, to take down barriers, to make it successful so they can stay in their jobs. Because, underrepresented groups are underrepresented because it hasn't always been easy for them to take the jobs. I'm a single mom. It's hard for me to be on my tools right now. If I'm a person that is gender diverse, I can't go to work if it's not safe for me to be there. There's so many barriers we need to remove to make sure diversity and inclusion can take place. So provincial commitments, and then, even when Indigenous groups or any other community groups are doing impact benefits agreements, holding all of the contractors, subcontractors, everyone involved to task on their diversity and inclusion is really important. Sorry, I could go on for days on it. Just, passionate about making sure everyone has a safe place.
Anything to add from the other panel? That deserves a round of applause.
I guess I could add on that a little bit too, and then bring it back to the environmental assessment type of process. But, early identification of barriers to underrepresented people or genders or whatever it may be, is key as part of that planning tool on how you're going to actually roll out your project, if that's a mine site or otherwise. But there's different tools, gender-based analysis plus, and different lenses that you can look at socioeconomic impacts, and then again bringing it back to mitigation measures or proposing to have human resources departments that develop certain plans that ensure that they promote diversity and inclusion and stuff like that. It starts early to take up into execution for sure.
Just to put on another hat of mine for a second, I'm the vice chair of the St. John's Status of Women's Council. One of the things we've talked about recently is that it felt very invasive almost to ask people to self-identify at times. We thought, oh, this might be a barrier to someone participating in programming, that we're asking them what groups do you belong to. But now we're realizing that folks really embrace that because you can't measure progress without benchmarking. And I think that's a really good point that you made, and figuring that out early, because you can't identify the supports needed without knowing who you're serving or underserving. So into that, let's go circular economy. A circular economic viewpoint, or a reduction of value, the identification of value from waste. I want to hear about your thoughts on practical examples like the utilization of waste rock piles for aggregate, rehabilitated tailings areas, reprocessed for minerals, and things of that nature, with the objective of mine site rehabilitation being the return of land to an original or improved state. How is embracing a circular economic approach impact the economic viability and the public perception of a project? It's another heavy one.
I think you're throwing that one at me, aren't you?
I'm looking at you first.
Well, again, it's it was mentioned in some of the earlier panel discussions, but bringing technology in or separating so that there are opportunities in future if there's different processing equipment, or if there's a different process that could be devised or is applicable. so that you can reduce and reuse stuff that might actually have some sort of economic feasibility to it. You know, obviously when it comes to reclamation, that's one of the most important things from a mining perspective in the communities. You know, we want to see that they are properly closed and capped, and they don't require monitoring further afield, you know, once the company has left the community, left the area essentially. So a circular economy in that regard, like I think that there's different ways that we can look at the waste from mining activities, and perhaps there's smarter planning approaches that you could potentially get some more economics out of it. But you know, when it comes to community benefits and building in different economic drivers too, you know, even the replanting, the hydro seeding, or the growing willow shoots, and the, you know, the whole progressive reclamation that takes place. You know, there's generators there as well, and there's industry that can be based on reclamation that has to be local. So there's definitely benefits that can be found from waste in that sense.
Absolutely. I think what we're learning is that in any sector and in any industry, embracing positive environmental policies, social policies, and good governance is not just a nice to have anymore, it's a must. And so to clue up, I'd like to ask each of you for your final thoughts on how mineral developments can embrace either and or environmental, social, or governance practices. So what would your key takeaway be for the folks here today? We'll start at the end.
Again, it comes back to your relationship building, and anywhere where you're doing activity to include and get educated from the Indigenous communities will help, especially with closure, because Indigenous people live a lot off the land. So there might be something in your closure or before you had started there that may be very significantly important to an Indigenous community, but you may not look at it like that. So it's nice to always try to get the opinions of Indigenous communities, and to see if they have any information that can get you there, especially for your closure and stuff, because they can go in and help and then give you an understanding of how the land should be so it can rehabilitate itself as well.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, you know, when you think about the key stakeholders, you know, you have government, you have industry, and Indigenous groups. And I think for a long time, we forgot about that cog of the wheel. And that's where we get into a lot of trouble, because if we're not considering environmental stewardship, and Indigenous people are the, you know, the founding members, so call, of environmental stewardship. So if you leave out that cog of the wheel, you know, you can't run things as smoothly as you'd like. So if you build the relationships from the very beginning and throughout, and then after the fact, you have so many opportunities to expand on what you're doing and do it in such a successful way. We've seen it in other First Nations across Canada, like really good examples of strong partnerships with governments and with industry. And, you know, we're going to make mistakes along the way, and we're going to learn from them. But I think if we keep in mind the next 7 generations to come, and, you know, we just respect one another and respect what we're doing, and, you know, like your mom says, you clean up your mess, just clean up your mess. So, yeah.
Can I add to that before you start? So Newfoundland is considered a consultation-free zone. So these companies do not have to engage with us, unfortunately. It's their good governance and their good hospitality that they do approach with us, and they do work with us. So that goes a long way. And even to the rest of Canada, it looks great to those companies, because they're showing that on their good governance, they are engaging with Indigenous people. So.
Well, the provincial government has a policy that says there's a duty to consult with any Indigenous group that asserts rights. So it's almost so loosely stated that it's dangerous.
Right.
So we really need to, you know, push our provincial government to firm up these policies to make sure we're doing right by everybody involved.
Yeah, and certainly, you know, again, bringing it back to baseline studies and feeding into environmental assessments, but, you know, early engagement and reaching out to communities. You can get traditional and local ecological knowledge that could, you know, inform the studies that you're going to be conducting. There's the potential to employ community members, in those types of programs, or understanding, some, maybe it's oral histories that could go into, potential archaeological zones. And there's all sorts of, really useful information that, can be built into your project that's going to be a more responsible development. And, it's certainly, you never want communities and First Nations, Indigenous peoples hearing about your project during the Crown's duty to consult. That's it's a recipe for disaster, as Tom had sort of presented there today. Obviously, there's some great examples with Boise's Bay and Baffinland and whatnot. But yeah, that's my 2 cents. And other than that, drive safe tonight. I guess everybody's dying to get out of here, but there's a lot of moose on the road, so be safe. Yeah.
And on that note, thank you to everyone who stuck around to listen to these fantastic panelists today. And to my panelists, thank you. Miigwech.